We are back talking week 13 running backs. I'm still wearing my Indiana t-shirt in honor of their big win last night against North Carolina at home. Jim, I'm sure you were
I was
tuned
watching.
in for that one.
I was, yeah. I was
Yeah.
watching. Well, as a Sixers fan, I purely watch for prospects. So
You were probably watching to see how dry the floor was. You were scouting that
I
just to
was I
see.
was jealous of the sheen. Of,
Unbelievable they couldn't get that situation fixed, but that is a story for a different
it
podcast.
is.
Let me get this up because I do want to start us off with this big game promotion. Oh, great. Now I can't even get there. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
I am, of course, the worst when it comes to technology. I am a few years older than a millennial. Oh, why is it doing this? It is not letting me get to it. Uh, oh, my. I am the worst. Give me 1 second.
Take your time. I can sit here and talk about. I'll start off. You do your thing.
Here we go. We
Yep.
got it.
You got
It
it.
happened. Big game 51, Houston, Texas, sponsored by RotoCurve. Finally, rotocurve.com/big hyphen game. You win free tickets to this event, plus fan experience events, and I'll tell you about them. 4-night trip to Houston. You get 2 tickets to the game, upgraded lower level end zone seats. You get VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celebrity game, and who wouldn't like that? You get $800 for airfare, which I think even if you're coming from Alaska, that should do you good. All you can eat Texas tailgate and more. Rotocurve.com/big game. Now that I've embarrassed myself, Jim, let's recover. And why don't you
Sure.
save us and talk about the running backs that are not embarrassing plays this week?
Sure. Well, I mean, you got your two superstars, right? You got Le'Veon Bell and you have David Johnson. There's even more actually than that, but
Well, let's
these.
talk. Let's do some substance here. Which do you
Sure.
prefer? Because you can only roster one.
Of course. Of
Which in
course.
each format?
Actually, I'm going with Le'Veon Bell this week. Um, in DraftKings. Um, I just think that the receiving work is so ridiculous, and I know David Johnson's the same animal here. It's the same thing. I just think everything usage wise is just so amazing in terms of he's got 23.3% of the target share since he's joined. That's like wide receiver one type stuff. Like for example, like Crabtree and Cooper have 24% of the Raiders offense. He's got one less reception than Antonio Brown since he's come back. He's third in the NFL in receptions. Only Melvin Gordon has a higher share of his team's rushing attempts than Bell. Bell's got 83% of the rushing attempts and something crazy like 89% of the rushing yards for the Steelers. So there's just no compromise, not like there is with Johnson either. I think the thing is, it's just how much I appreciate this Steelers offense when they're home. And the fact that this is a guy who's going to give you 140 total yards and any kind of scoring stuff is gravy on top of his 20-plus fantasy points. At the same time, David Johnson's been a 27-point monster himself in DFS and in DraftKings particularly. But the other factor is he's $300 cheaper than I think on FanDuel, Bell's more. So it makes sense almost, in my opinion, especially because I think Johnson's got a little bit more juice in the rushing angle there. That I'm going to go over to Johnson on FanDuel, and I like Bell on DraftKings. And it's really about pricing and just kind of the usage, because as much as Johnson's been elite and awesome, a lot of his stuff is based off big receptions, big plays. And Bell can also just get you 10 to 11 catches, which no other – put it this way, he would be on pace for like 128 catches if it was a full season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think regardless of site, I'm going Bell. I got him projected significantly higher.
Right.
And of course, on DraftKings, he is cheaper. So I definitely love him there. I think if you're spending up for one guy, it's Bell. And he's definitely a guy I want to spend up on. And let me just recommend, I know this sounds like me being a company guy, but if you're playing this week, Fantasy Draft is a great spot because there are 4 running backs that I think are worthy of using in cash games, and it's the only place you could fit them. If you do play DraftKings, then you come down to a difficult choice of like, do I go with the value receiver and Le'Veon Bell, or do I go Jordan Howard and a spend up for a receiver? And that's a tough one for me because I think Jordan Howard's in a better spot this week than Jay Ajayi was last week.
I agree.
I know his salary went up, but I mean,
plus the
his
reception
offensive line is banged up. Right. The receiving work, the fact that his offensive line is banged up too, like Ajayi's was, but we have a sample size with him doing well. I mean, he averaged 4.7 yards a carry last week with the same guys out. Sitting maybe back this week, we're not sure. But even if he's not, I mean, this 49ers team, I feel good about, good backs getting it done against them. And pretty much since that 7-carry game against Green Bay, John Fox has said, this is my bell cow, and gone back and he's used them correctly. So I think Jordan Howard is the guy that if you're fluctuating on between a third running back, between him and Bell, that's my fluctuation in cash, because there's two guys I'm locking in. Theo Riddick, who I think is an absolute lock, both cash and tournaments this week. I might have 100% Theo Riddick and 100% Drew Brees. Like I mentioned in the quarterback, because the Saints rank 32nd in DVOA to receiving backs. They've given up the most 40-yard plays, I think the second most 40-yard plays of anyone, and Theo Riddick is explosive. We've seen, teams like the Falcons dominate them in terms of rushing. I mean, Riddick is just an explosive player against a defense that gives up explosive plays. So I think you got to love him there, plus the fact that he's the best receiving back. So on PPR sites, I think he gets it done. And then Jeremy Hill's a guy I like again, who's just too cheap. It's pretty much like I was explaining to Pfeiffer on the video yesterday, it's pretty much the same matchup with a different team. I mean, you look at the DVOA numbers and like the construction of the defense, and it's a tough rushing defense that shuts down tight ends but gives it up to receivers. That's exactly what the Ravens were, right? Except they just did it better than the Eagles, even by a little bit. So Jeremy Hill, caught 6 passes, which is a career high for 61 yards, which is the most since the 4th week of his rookie season. They're clearly committing to him as a bell cow, and he's still insanely cheap. So with that kind of work, I mean, he can easily cap a day off with a touchdown. If he doesn't cap it off with a touchdown, I still think we see plenty of receiving work. I'm willing to go to him even in a tough matchup. So those are the guys I like for cash. Tell me if you got something different.
No, I love Hill. The Eagles actually, I think it's one of these functions of teams can pass on the Eagles, so they don't run a lot. So if you look at totals, it's not that impressive, but they've given up, I think the 8th most yards per carry, to running back. So it's not like they're stoppers. And some of that has to do with, I think, early in the season, the Redskins ran all over them. And then Elliott ran, did pretty well against them. But that happened, right? Those aren't outliers. Those things happened. But the thing with Hill is the consolidation of the workload. Rex Burkhead's obviously not Gio Bernard. So, yeah, I mean, the career highs in routes, targets, and receptions really it's loud. It's really loud in terms of what it's doing for his floor. And I agree with you. He had his 3rd most points on DraftKings last week, and that's without a touchdown. You could never imagine before Jeremy Hill having 15 fantasy points without a touchdown. And now, like you said, touchdowns are almost gravy. They're going to put him way above value, where it's almost like you're expecting value as a total yardage guy, which has really never been his thing. So, yeah, it's really refreshing. And Riddick as well. I mean, you said it. The Saints give up 52.5 yards receiving per game, the 4th most in the league, and a ton of big plays. We know their linebackers aren't good. Craig Robinson, Nathan Stupar, Ellerbe. These guys aren't good in space. There's a reason they're playing for the Saints right now in terms of how much exposure they're getting. They wouldn't be playing on other defenses. And, yeah, and only behind Bell and Johnson is Riddick with 6.7 targets per game. So the usage is there. He's also running kind of well, too, recently. Like 9 carries a game, 45 yards per game over the last month. That matters. I mean, you throw in 45 yards plus 45, 50 yards. You're talking about an 85, 90 total yard floor here. If not floor, but like reasonable projection, I guess would be the way to say it, median outcome. But for cash, that's pretty much it. I'm going to there's other names that I am tempted to like in cash, but these guys, Hill and Riddick, are too complimentary. I also, if you are going to ever pivot away from Bell and Johnson and you want to save money and say where you want to do your cash work is in receivers, I don't mind at all Melvin Gordon. I mean, obviously, I know that Tampa defense played well last week, but I think traveling's a different story. The fact that he's got 4.9 red zone touches per game leads the league, second only to DeMarco Murray in goal-to-goal touches per game. So just the idea being it's a high enough point total, right? It's the team total for the Chargers is still healthy enough. I don't know what it is, 26 points or something like that. It's healthy enough that they're going to have multiple scoring opportunities, and that means he's going to have multiple scoring opportunities, you'd assume, based on his usage. So, yeah, and he also, like I said, he's got 89% of his team's carries, which is ridiculous. That's since week 4. I think it's still the most in the league. If you go all the way back to week 1, it's like 82%. So he's just the most dominant market share kind of guy in terms of goal line and early down. And he's 7,200 on DraftKings. It's not that much really compared to the receivers. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if you did a cash lineup with Jeremy Hill and Melvin Gordon, yeah, you don't have the ceiling that Bell brings, but I still think you can do really well in cash there and still be able to pay up elsewhere. So that would be my only caveat would be, other than Bell, would be if you did Gordon and Hill or Gordon and Riddick.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, Gordon's going to get back to scoring one of these days, so
Right.
I definitely understand that. Let's go to tournaments, and I want to start us off with two guys. Mark Ingram, because I think you can't really have enough Saints. I mean, I was talking, if you simulate this game 100 times, I mean, I think the Saints probably average, probably average 40 points.
Right.
And so they're going to be in the red zone plenty. Ingram averaged over 10 yards a carry last week. Now, I know that's not sustainable, and it's probably aided by big plays. But, that being said, there's going to be a lot of offense here. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to score. Am I a little worried that Hightower or one of the other guys gets it done for them? Of course, but, if there is a correlation between, a team's high implied total and a position, it's usually running back. So Mark Ingram's in a good spot. I'm not afraid to use like 4 Saints in a lineup, especially in tournaments. If this team goes over 40 points, it could be like one of those games where, Brady gets it done and then we get LeGarrette Blount, where Palmer gets it done, we get David Johnson, one of those big scoring outputs where it is kind of an outlier. We can use multiple guys in multiple positions. So I love him. The other guy I want to mention, LaShawn McCoy at Oakland. I mean, it didn't look like his hand was bothering him too much. No. I'm not really worried about this Oakland team. He's one of those guys who always seems to be under-owned amongst the guys who are true like workhorse backs. We're always talking about Johnson. We're always talking about Bell. We're always talking about Elliott. We're always talking about Gordon. So McCoy kind of seems to slip through the cracks. And, on both sides, he might be, a little overpriced from where you're comfortable, which makes him a great tournament play because he's involved in both the passing and rushing games. So big LaShawn McCoy fan this week. Who do you like in tournaments?
I like Spencer Ware. I just think I know that the thing with him has been the lack of scoring, right? Like the lack of touchdowns and just how frustrating and conservative and kind of splintered this Chiefs offense can prove. So I don't like it in cash, and he's not cheap enough in cash for me to be able to stomach his lack of scoring prowess. But, he's one of the better big play receiving threats. I know a lot of that was consolidated early in the season, but we've seen it happen. He's a talented guy once he gets the ball in his hands. Miss, and when he can take off, he does have that kind of long speed that you want for a guy who's going to be in the receiving phase. And it's really just about the matchup. I mean, we talked about bad linebackers for the Saints. The Falcons are the worst. I mean, the crazy part is the Falcons have given up the most points per drive in the NFL, like just slightly more than the Browns, more than the Saints. So this is a really enviable matchup. I think it's kind of sneakily, like if the Chiefs weren't such a conservative offense, I think we'd be talking this game up a little bit more, just in terms of another game in the Georgia Dome that could be fun offensively, kind of the way we talked about last week's Arizona game down there. The other thing is just that they've given up, like I said, the most yards per game to running backs in the receiving phase, 69 yards, nice, right? Per game in the air, and then it's also 68.7% more than the average team. So they've given up like something crazy, like 16% more than the next closest team per game, but 69% more than league average, which is just ridiculous. Which means this is such a plus matchup for a receiving back, and a lot of it has to do with personnel. Like Deion Jones, Devondre Campbell, these guys who are playing like every down snaps for the Falcons. If you watch their tape, these guys are they're like route jumpers, but as linebackers. You know what I mean? Like if you get by these guys, you're gone. And they're young, speedy linebackers who take risks. They're almost like guards in the NBA who are lane jumpers, and then they give up a ton of points. I watched Allen Iverson's entire career, so I'm used to seeing that. And yeah, that's kind of what happens with these guys, and I think Ware has that upside. Another guy who I don't think many people will be on, that same game you talked about with McCoy, Latavius Murray. I think he's cheap enough to get into. Like on rosters, he's really cheap. You can really pay down and get him. And there is some real risk because we've seen a variant kind of usage pattern. But I think DeAndre Washington being a healthy scratch last week tells you something. I think Jalen Richard had his lowest snap rate in I think like 6 weeks. And Mary's got, I know this is inflated by that Denver game, but still, he's got the fourth most, red zone touches since week 6 among backs. So there's some upside in the scoring department, and his floor is getting a little bit higher now that he's taking over some of the work. So you called it right this summer that Oakland's going to be a passing game and that Carr's the breakout. You definitely called that. I'm impressed. I think this is a game where, again, we can still see Carr be busy. But I do think, you see Murray here, especially because of how good the pass rush is for Buffalo. I think they're going to want to kind of slow them down a little bit. I think Buffalo's third in the league in pressure rate. So I think Murray could be busy.
All right, and I saved the best for last because I think this is the conundrum this week. Kenneth Dixon, what to do with him?
Oh, yeah.
I
love him.
Yeah, I'm bordering on considering him a cash play in order to fit some monster wide receivers. I mean, if you can go Breeze and get, 2 of the top guys.
If you did Breeze, Hill, and Dixon, then you can do it,
Right, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm saying is you might even be able to do Breeze, Julio, Brown, and make that an actual thing. And I think Dixon has the upside. I mean, I'm definitely going to do that in some tournaments. I think Dixon has the upside to make that worthwhile. Just to be completely honest. I mean, last week, career high in rushes, career high in rushing yards. Now, mind you, he was about half as efficient as he was with, some smaller workloads, but that's bound to happen when a guy sees the ball more. He was targeted 4 times, caught all 4. He outsnapped Terrence West. I saw Brad Evans on Twitter tweet that he's second in tackles evaded per touch in terms of running backs. So he's
elusive. Yeah, and that was his thing coming out of Louisiana Tech. He's elusive.
Exactly. So I think there is a spot here against Miami, which is a good run defense, not great. I mean, I just care more about the volume here, to be quite honest, that I think one of these weeks, his elusiveness is going to show. He's going to break a big one, and then it's going to be over, and they're going to be committed to him as their workhorse back. Now, he hasn't shown that yet, but FanDuel 5,100, and he's way cheaper on DraftKings. 3,700 is the spot to play him on DraftKings. I have a hard time not liking him in all formats. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it in cash. I'm going to weigh my options, but I do think he is somewhat cash worthy because I think this workload is just on the rise, and I'm curious of your take.
Yeah, I think they're seeing a seed change here. If you look kind of at the progression on his snap rates, right? It's gone up each week. It's all the way up to 45% last week. I also think there's going to be some kind of disappointment bias, whatever kind of bias you want to apply, because I think especially in season long, people that were stashing Dixon and they read these things about how he's going to take over and then he didn't. I guess what I'm saying is it's like a post hype kind of thing, right? Like everybody at first thought he's going to take over and be the guy immediately, but it's taken some time, and also I think we have to appreciate this is his first run in the league. But yeah, everything lines up here. The Dolphins pressure, they have the second best pressure rate in the league. It's one of the best pressure rates in the last 5 years, really. Cameron Wake's going crazy. They're pressuring quarterbacks on 33% of their dropbacks. And the reason I say that is because when pressured, Flacco dumps the ball off constantly. His average air yards per attempt is right up there with Bradford and even Stafford. These guys are passing the ball 5 to 4 yards downfield. So check down stuff, and I think that does play into Dixon. If he's on the field for even half the snaps, we can expect, if we're just going to price in he's gaining 10% more usage each week. So if he does that again this week, we're talking about 17, 18 touches. He had 17 touches last week. I like it, and the thing is, the way to beat the Dolphins is in the running game and is against those linebackers. We've been talking about bad linebackers this whole show. That's what they have down there. Jelani Jenkins. You get these guys in space. They don't really have a good linebacking core. Past Sue and that front line, you can get these guys in space and hurt them. And yeah, last year, Dixon for Louisiana Tech, he led the draft-eligible backs in yards per route run. So he's a shifty, elusive guy, and he's a very gifted receiver. He was the highest graded receiving back in the last year's draft class, too, on College Football Focus. So I agree with you. I love Dixon. I have him here in my rosters article. I had him in my ESPN article this week. He's – one of these weeks is going to happen, and you're going to have to kind of just keep trying.
Can you hear me? There we go. All right. I was going to That was strange.
Could you hear me? No.
Yeah, I
Okay.
could. I think it was just a momentary
My
lapse in
cord
my
there. Yeah.
internet. Yeah. But yeah, I think you're finally going to be rewarded for playing him this week. Uh, let's say that if you were waiting to go north of the Mason Dixon line, with the Mason Dixon line being 15 fantasy points, this might be the week that you go above it. So there's my terrible pun for this
We
video.
call it the Derek Mason line.
Exactly. So let's end on that while we still have good internet. Big Game 51. Just want to remind you, rotocurve.com/big-game. You'll win free tickets to it, or at least you have a chance to if you go visit that website. Plus some fan experience events. You got to check them all out. Lower level seats, VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celeb game, $800 towards airfare, and all kinds of great stuff. Go ahead, rotocurve.com/big game. Stay tuned. We'll be back with wide receivers.